It's Christmas morning and we just had this lovely fall of snow. It's been raining for the last couple of days, so we didn't think we'd have a white Christmas, but here it is and it's glorious. I just had to make a video for you guys. In this video, I want to show you how to use snow to help you design your garden. There's not a lot of gardening you can do this time of year, but one thing I do like to do is design new beds. I can sit in my easy chair, take out a piece of paper and a pencil and just draw away. Draw different designs and put ideas onto paper. Do some Googling for pictures and pick out something really nice for a new bed I want to create next year. The space behind me is one of the last areas that still has grass. It's sitting over my weeping bed, and so leaving grass there is actually a pretty good idea. But I'm thinking of maybe putting a garden there. What shape should I use? What is going to look best? One of the things that's really hard to do on a piece of paper, particularly when you're sitting inside, is to see how the scale works with the rest of the garden. How does the new bed design fit into the rest of the area? Now, a lot of people suggest taking out a hose and bending the hose around and looking at it that way. And you can do that in summer, and that works okay too. But I want to garden in the winter. I can't wait for spring, so let's do some design now. Well, here's a little trick I learned that works really well in the winter time. I'm going to go design my garden right out in the garden. Now, I've just walked around the area and outlined where I think I want my new bed. Now I can very clearly see how it fits into the rest of the garden. There's still grass over here, and I want that nice and wide for my lawnmower. So that's still there, so that works. There's a pathway up that way. It's easy to get to. Sitting in the middle, and it kind of uses up this space that's kind of empty right now. But the nice thing is I can see exactly where it is. And if I don't like it, I can just erase it and try a slightly different pattern. Let's make this side a little bigger and see what that would look like. I think that's even better. Now you can only erase it so many times, then you gotta wait for a new snowstorm. But it actually works really great. And the really important thing is that you see it in scale with the rest of the garden. That's so hard to do on a piece of paper. Now let's go have a tour of the rest of the garden and see what snow can tell us about the design of our garden. Before we go outside, I'd like to do something that a lot of people forget to do when they're designing a garden. Let's have a look at the garden from inside the house. We spend most of our time inside looking out. We don't really spend that much time in the garden, especially in areas that have long winters. So it's really important that you design your garden to look good from your windows. Here's what I see when I'm having breakfast. I really like that view, and it looks good all year long. Here's the view from my living room. When I designed my garden, a lot of the design in the backyard was done so that I will have a good view from the house. The tea house on the top of the hill was positioned there on purpose. It looks good in the garden, but it also looks good and interesting from inside the house. Go to your main windows and look out. What do you see? Do you see a great garden? Or do you have a view that's kind of boring? Well, the great thing about a boring view is that now you can go out and design something different and make it better. Think about your garden design from inside the house each time you make a change. Now let's go out in the garden and see what we can find. This is the hill in my backyard. As you can see, there's lots of interesting things there. I have some shrubs, I have some evergreens, I have some perennials that are still standing up, I have some grasses. The garden looks good in winter. And what that tells me is that if it's interesting in winter, it will also be interesting the rest of the year. There's always something to see. Now in summer, it'll look quite different. It'll be very green with lots of lush leaves and flowers. But even when those aren't there, I have some basic bones in this garden that will make it look interesting. One of the benefits of looking at your garden in the winter is that you eliminate a lot of distractions. All those colorful flowers are gone. All the green leaves are gone. Those things look really pretty, and a lot of times when we look at a garden, we see those and we conclude, hey, this garden looks pretty good. And that's probably true. Maybe in June it's a great looking garden. But what does it look like in March? What about October? When you're designing your garden, you really want 12 months of interest. Now is a great time to see what you've really got. I was standing on the back patio looking out at this garden and something struck me. When I look at this picture, it's fairly interesting. I have some goldenrod that's still standing up. I've got a couple logs with roots sitting on the ground, and you can still see them through the snow, at least a little bit. There's quite a few rocks here. It's still an interesting garden. But now let me pan the picture to the right by about 20 feet. We're not going very far. Now what we have is almost nothing. Now this garden is full of snowdrops in the spring, and it looks really nice. And that's followed with some other spring flowering bulbs. But to be honest, I've noticed that this garden is really not that special looking. Even in the middle of summer, there's just not enough going on in here. And in winter, this problem is much easier to see. I really need to do something with this garden to make it more interesting all year long. Hardscape is really important in the garden, and it's the main bones that you have. Those solid things that set off the green leaves of plants really well. This is in my shade garden. I was putting in this flagstone pathway, and you can see 3 arms to this pathway. But when I got to this central spot, I thought I have to do something different to make it a little more interesting. So rather than use flagstone to go all the way around, I decided to use bricks and create a completely different design. The flagstone is very informal, gives you that soft shade garden look. The bricks are laid in a very formal pattern. They contrast with the flagstone. That contrast makes this spot so much more interesting. This is the kind of design that almost everybody can use. I'm sure you have a pathway somewhere, and you've probably used the same material from the start to the end of that pathway. Why not shake things up a little bit and halfway along that, change the pathway, change the material you're using, the shape of that material, make it wider, make it narrower. Do something to make that garden more interesting. If you think back about the gardens you've seen in the past, you probably have a recollection of some really great gardens. Ask yourself what made them special. In almost every case, those special gardens become memorable because they have something in them that's different than the average garden. As long as your design follows what everybody else in the neighborhood is doing, it will not be special. This is a view at the end of the garden, and I wanted to put something fairly large here because I wanted to draw people to this part of the garden. So I decided to put in a 40-foot arbor. Now it serves several purposes. It is not only a destination for my visitors, but it also houses my clematis collection. And both sides of this arbor is now full of clematis. It also gives me a way to display some of my art, and we'll have a look at that in a few minutes. This is near the front of the house, right beside the garage, and it's the pathway that takes you to the back of the house and into my shade garden. This was always kind of a boring entrance. When people came to my house, they never took this pathway because it didn't really look like it went anywhere. There wasn't anything exciting there. So I built this entrance gate, and now it's so much more interesting. And when I have a large group of people come to my garden, half of them go around the other side of the house, and half go this side, because now there's something interesting here. This is a pretty simple arbor, and in fact I have a video that shows you exactly how to make this. Now it does a couple things. Again, it's a great place to grow clematis, and in fact the left side of this arbor is now housing 3 different clematis. They're smaller plants and not too aggressive, so I can have 3 in the same spot. The other side has 1 very aggressive clematis, and I've now added a wisteria, which will grow up and cover the roof of this arbor. The front part of the arbor, the bottom right corner of this picture, is grass. It's kind of boring. To the left of this arbor, in the wintertime, it's also kind of boring. What you're looking at here is part of my rock garden, and all of these plants are a couple inches tall. So in the winter time, once it snows, you don't see anything except snow. By putting a structure in the middle of this boring area, the garden suddenly becomes interesting 12 months of the year. I love art in the garden, and I think it's so important for people to have this. So my garden has quite a few pieces now. This is a stone carving from Africa. It's about 3 feet tall, has a really nice shape to it. Unfortunately, the stone is kind of a gray color. On this day, it was very cloudy, so even the snow kind of looks gray. And all the plants are either gray or brown, so it doesn't really stand out. When you're selecting art, pick something you really like, but at the same time, try to pick something with some color. We want to introduce color into the garden all year long because plants and flowers won't do that for us. The other thing I've noticed is that this statue is a little small, so the plants around it are also 3-4 feet tall. In the middle of summer, it kind of gets hidden. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. I don't like the fact that this statue is hidden because a lot of visitors don't see it. But on the other hand, by hiding it a little bit, those that do see it get a nice surprise. So sometimes it's good to partially hide that art so that you don't see it right away when you enter the garden. This is at the front of the house. I went out and bought one of these large flower pots. It was a dark gray color. It's made from fiberglass, so it can stay out all winter long. The shape is great, but it's kind of a boring color. It would do nothing in this spot if I'd left it the color it was. So what I did was I painted it up. And I really should make a video to show you how to do this. This is actually really easy to paint this. You need no painting skills at all. Here's a new piece I got last year. It's a metal sculpture. I was kind of hoping it would keep the wild turkeys out of the garden, but it doesn't seem to be scaring anybody. Have a look at this sculpture. See how the snow lays on it. If you're picking between a couple different pieces of art, try to pick one that looks good in winter, which means that it has some flat surfaces where the snow can set. That is so much more interesting in winter when you really need something in the garden. Back to the 40-foot arbor. When I built this, I specifically designed some windows into it. So here's a picture that's hanging in the arbor, and both on the left and right side I have clematis that grow up. And you can see the picture between the clematis. Now the clematis look really great for about 3 weeks in the summer when they're blooming. And the rest of the year they're sort of okay, but they're not really great. But if you look at this piece of art, it's here 12 months of the year. It's always adding color to the garden. This is a few feet away from the last picture. Another new piece of art is this bird that I bought. Behind the bird, you'll see a bench. Now, we don't usually think of benches as being pieces of art, but in some ways they are. They're structures that are different than the shrubs and perennials that are in our garden, and so they stick out. There's something interesting to see. The other benefit of a bench is that it's a great destination place. When people see benches in the garden, they tend to head to them, and so you can use the bench to direct people through the garden the way you want them to go. And when it's covered in snow, it's kind of pretty looking. Now, if we zoom in some more and have a look at the background, you'll see this shed. Now, I could have built this shed and painted it a brown color, try to hide it, make it blend into the woods. I decided that this garden needs as much color as it can get, so I painted it blue. It sticks out in the garden, but it adds color at the same time. And to add just a little bit more color, I have a couple more paintings that I put on the outside. I got this sculpture last year. When I first seen it, I thought, well, it's not that special. It's kind of interesting. Now that I have it in place, I'm really starting to love this thing. It's about 4 feet in diameter, made out of metal. It's pretty simple. Big circle with little circles inside, painted yellow. So why does this work? Well, it does a couple things. One is it's partially hidden behind some trees. So the viewer doesn't always see it. It kind of depends on which direction they're walking through my shade garden. But from the main path, there's also a small path that goes up right beside the sculpture. So the sculpture is actually drawing people into the wooded area. But the real reason it works is the shape and the color. All of the shapes beside the sculpture are straight lines.
tree trunks, branches, and so on. So you have this contrast between round and linear, and that works well to make this really stand out. And of course, making it a bright yellow doesn't hurt either. Don't be afraid of using color in the garden. Let's talk a little bit about evergreens. Now, during the summer, these things are kind of boring. There's lots of other things around that are so much more interesting, particularly flowering plants. But in early spring, when evergreens start to grow, that new growth can be a very bright color. But where these things really shine is the off-season, early spring, late fall, and particularly in winter. They add some real structure to the garden. Most of the backyard gardens that I see could be improved quite a bit by adding some evergreens. Here's a couple blue spruce. They're slow growing. They grow about 4 inches a year. I think they're called Montgomery. They were on sale one day, so I bought several of them, and I had 2 extras, and I thought, well, I'll just put them into this part of the garden. Now, there's one rule of garden design. Never put 2 things of something together. Now, sometimes you can break that rule, but most of the time it doesn't work. So here I have 2 evergreens. Shapes are the same, the color's the same. Now that they're larger, more prominent in the landscape, they really don't look that good together. One of these guys has to go, and it's probably going to be the one in the front because it's starting to overgrow on the pathway. Here's another collection of evergreens. Each one's a little different in shape. Each one has a little different color, and it just makes a great picture. And they're there all year long. When you're in my garden and you're looking in this direction, you can actually see a road in the distance. So these evergreens are starting to hide the traffic going along that road. So they also serve a purpose, and that's really why I planted them here. And they come in different colors. This is a really nice yellow one. It's a false cypress. Easy to grow in my garden. You can trim it, shape it the way you want. I've started rooting cuttings from this, and they actually root quite easily. But this yellow color is so nice compared to all the green that's usually in this garden. The Nucatensis. This is a great plant, and it's quite common. Lots of people buy it. But still, even though it's common, it's a great architectural plant. Can you guess what kind of shrub this is? It is an evergreen. Well, this is a yew. Now, yews usually grow as large bushes, but you can trim them into any shape you want. And a few years ago, I started shaping this and clipping it into a pom-pom shape. This is called cloud pruning, and I have a separate video that shows you how I did this. Instead of a boring, green, big shrub, I now have a shrub that has a lot of architectural structure and so much more interesting. Here's a little bridge using a Japanese-style design. There's a pond on the left and a pond on the right. Lots of people cross this to get a better look at the ponds, and it looks great in the winter. All right, let's look at some perennials and other types of plants that look good in winter. Now, most things don't look that great in winter. They're brown. A lot of things get knocked to the ground, so you don't even see them once it snows. But there are some plants that still look good in winter, and you can select the right kind of plants for a good winter garden. You might recognize this as a yucca plant. It's Yucca filamentosa. It's not the greatest shaped plant. I don't really like this floppy design, but it does have 3 things going for it. One is extremely easy to grow and never needs water. In fact, it grows better if it's dry. 2, it's evergreen in my Zone 5 garden. It's green like this all winter long. There are not many plants that do that in my climate. And the 3rd thing is that it has one of the most spectacular flower spikes you'll ever see. Now, if you don't like the shape of this plant, how about this one? This is also a yucca. It's Yucca glauca. The shape of the leaves is different. They're much stiffer. They're much smaller. It flowers about the same way. Likes to be dry. Takes no effort to care for it. It is a bit slower growing, and it's green in the winter. What more can you ask for? Some plants will hold on to their seed pods, and they become very interesting in winter. This is a red bud, just covered in seed pods. And I can usually harvest the seeds in spring because they'll still be on the plant. Many types of shrubs will make berries that last a good part of the winter. At some point the birds will come and eat these, but at least you have a good display part of the winter. Even something as simple as a clematis looks great with snow on it. The clematis tend to hold on to some of their leaves, and so they catch the snow. You might not know what this is. This is actually a witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana, except this is a named cultivar. The straight species blooms in October and November. Most of the named cultivars will bloom in February, March. So these are the buds on the plant, ready to burst open as soon as there's any kind of warmth. And you can't forget the grasses. Ornamental grasses are made for winter time. Don't cut them down in fall. Leave them all to stand up. In the winter, the ones with stiffer stems will last longer. The ones with soft stems tend to get knocked down by heavy snow. But still, grasses in the winter are great. This is the American beech. One of the neat things about this tree is that it holds on to its leaves, and these are usually still on the plant in the spring. So now it adds some color to an otherwise boring garden. Now our native beech is a pretty large tree, but there are a number of cultivars around that will grow much slower. Give one of those a try. Now here's something that's kind of a boring shrub. It's a spirea. They're actually really good shrubs, but they're boring because everybody's got them. You don't have to do anything to this shrub, just let it grow. Every 3 or 4 years, if it gets too big, just hack it back. You can shape it if you want, but you don't have to. This is a no-maintenance shrub. And look at it in winter. It actually is one of the better looking shrubs. Here's a perennial sedum. These flower really late in the fall, and if you get the right kind, the stems are pretty stiff on them, and they will stand up all winter long. Walk through your garden and see which perennials are still looking good at this time of year and which are not. Then in spring, when you're thinking about changing some of your perennials, maybe get rid of the ones that don't look so good all year long. But this sedum autumn joy is a great plant. I was looking at a shrub border. It has 5 or 6 different shrubs. They're all nice plants, but this time of the year, none of them were really standing out, except this one. This is actually one of the smaller growing magnolias. It has lots of branches that are quite thin, so they hold on to the snow well, and this just makes such a nice display after a snowfall. One of the things that's important in garden design is to think about the views from various points in your garden. Go to the spot where most visitors end up and have a look around. What do you see? Do you see a nice view? If you do, maybe you can plant things to enhance that view. Maybe you can change the pathway or put a piece of art somewhere so people see that view a little easier. Design is all about getting the viewer's eye going in the direction we want it to go. So here's a picture I took last year. It's got a nice little bridge that crosses my waterfall, a little bench for people to sit down. This is a shady garden, so on a hot July day, this is a great spot to sit. We've got some sugar maples on the left and another one on the right. And if you look very carefully in the distance, you can sort of make out my Japanese tea house. The problem here is that I have a lot of shrubby things growing behind the bench. Most of these are in fact European buckthorn, which I'm still battling on this property. They're preventing the viewer from actually seeing the tea house. So they're destroying what could be a really good view. The sugar maples on the left also have some lower branches, and those branches are also in the way of the view, especially if you take a few steps further and you're standing on the bridge. Here's a picture I took this year after cleaning out the area. Those buckthorns are gone, and so now I can see through to the view really nicely. Now in this picture, I haven't taken out some of the branches yet on the sugar maples. That's a job for this winter. I'm going to open this view up so that it's even easier to see the tea house. It's important to stand at the important parts in your garden and have a look around and decide what is the best view, and then do something to direct the eye of the visitor towards that view. So I hope I've given you some ideas that will help you improve the design of your garden. I think garden design is not a one-step job that you do once and then you live with the garden. Garden design is all about changing it, constantly improving it. As plants mature, the garden changes, and you want to adjust the design to take advantage of those changes. And of course, the other thing is, if you're a true gardener, you're kind of stuck inside this time of year and you want to get your hands dirty. You want to start getting into the garden. And there's not much you can do out there except design. And I find a garden with snow on it a great time to get in the garden and do some of this design work. Have fun this winter, get yourself ready for spring, and you'll have a better garden next year. Now, I've made a number of garden design videos, and I'll put a link to those in the top right-hand corner. Happy gardening!